we have to be careful, right? Because that's a child who will grow up too soon, mature too soon, and miss out on the joy of childhood. Now, there is, it's they don't have the most joyful childhood. They have a childhood. The little moments of joy are what we try to find, and they're always tainted with, oh, if I think to myself, oh, if he could see them now, oh, he would be so proud. And I make sure I tell them he would be so proud, and here's why he would be so proud, because I can't just say it as a blanket statement, because part of it is that positive reinforcement of who they are and how he wanted them to progress in life.
Welcome to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. I'm your host, Kendra Rinaldi. This is a space to explore the full spectrum of grief, from the kind that comes with death to the kind that shows up in life's many transitions. Through stories and conversations, we remind each other that we're not alone. Your journey matters, and here we're figuring it out together. Let's dive right in to today's episode. Let's start with a quick disclaimer. This podcast includes personal stories and perspectives on topics like grief, health, and mental wellness. The views expressed by guests are their own and may reflect individual experiences that are not meant as medical advice. As the host, I hold space for diverse voices, but that does not mean I endorse every viewpoint shared. Please listen with care and take what resonates with you. Thank you for joining us today. Today I have the honor of welcoming Samina Bari. She is an author, a best-selling author, and the creator of Don't Call Me a Widow, which is a first-hand guide to help support someone who's lost their spouse. And it is an amazing resource and a different way of also looking at something that we really sometimes don't talk about as much, of the spousal support, spousal loss, and just that journey. Welcome, Samina.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, Kendra.
Thank you for being here. We had started chatting before we started recording regarding of where I live. I want to know where you live now and where did you grow up, and just a little bit of that family dynamics, and also how you met your husband, Doug. So if
Oh,
you want to
yes.
go into that journey.
Well, I'll say I'm first generation. My parents had immigrated from India and Pakistan, and I grew up in a really conservative background in New York City, a place called Staten Island. And for as long as I can remember, I was the only one like me. I grew up in a very white Catholic, either Italian Catholic or Irish Catholic community. So I always had this feeling of not quite belonging. And so when I set my sights on college, I wanted to go somewhere different and be immersed in lots of cultures. So I went to New York University, which really is a beautiful place for diversity and different people with different backgrounds, different cultures, and lived in New York for a number of years through my formative young professional years until I met my husband, Doug, through work. I happened to work on at an agency, and he was my client. And he walked in one day as a new client, and it really was love at first sight.
Did he have
And
to sign any release of like client,
oh, the conflict.
any
Yeah,
conflict of interest?
it was one of those things that truly it was, I think, love at first sight for both of us. And so we dated, basically went from our first date to proper boyfriend, girlfriend within 8 days. And I then went to my management and I took myself off of the account because, of course, it is a conflict of interest. Um, and we were on the East Coast for a number of years. We lived, because we both worked in pharmaceuticals, we lived in Bucks County, Pennsylvania for a number of years. And then both just kind of got tired of the East Coast and the cold, cold winters and the snow we were just talking about.
Yes.
So we moved to Northern California. And we've been here since on and off since 2014. We had a few years that we went and lived in Austin for a little bit and just came back. And so the Bay Area is home, and it's where I'm raising our young twin daughters who are going to be turning 10 in March.
They're turning, yeah, you have your hands full, and we'll talk about that too with two at the same age.
Yeah,
Oh, wait till the teenage years. I mean, wait till that.
everyone's telling me, and I'm already stressed out about it.
Yeah, I hope your doors don't sound very loud when they shut.
Oh, they have started slamming already. One of them. One of them's a slammer, yes.
I know the expression, the hormones. It's like a whole other ball game of what happens right in our minds. Thank you for sharing that, and then your journey of where you started, where you ended, and this part of belonging. This word of belonging. I am curious even with that now, and we can tie it into now the aspect of belonging even now as you are navigating life as a solo parent too, and in these different group settings. So I don't want to forget that because you mentioned you growing up in a place where you didn't really quite fit in, and I am curious if that emotion of belonging has showed up even now in your 3 years of doing solo parenting and the different family dynamics that and people around you. Or you could answer that now if you
Yeah, yeah,
want.
I think that's really interesting. When I grew up, I was conscious of it, but I'm not sure if other people are conscious of it, right? Because in my estimation, people didn't treat me any differently, but for some reason, I felt different because I looked different and I was different. I was unusual. I was what they called exotic years ago. Um, and I just kind of tried not to think about it a lot and just fit in and did everything to fit in. So, for example, my parents spoke their language to me, Urdu, but I answered back in English. And as a result, unfortunately, I'm not quite literate in Urdu, but I understand it. I just can't speak it. But I don't think I saw it that way, and I don't think anyone ever called it out that way. Now, today is very different, unfortunately, isn't it? So I'm a little more sensitive to it. But it's something you carry, right? It's something, again, I don't think anyone treated me any differently, but I always felt like I had to prove more in order to fit in. And I know that when we did a short stint in the Austin area, we lived in a beautiful kind of bedroom community called Dripping Springs, and my children had just started preschool, and I saw a class of 30 blonde, blue eyed children. And one of my children looks very much like my husband, who was white. So she's got very light eyes, very fair skin. She doesn't look like she's a mixed race. My other daughter looks like me, so she's got darker hair and olive skin, and she always stuck out, among the little head of little blonde kids. And I realized in that moment I didn't want her to feel other. I wanted her to just fit in. And that was part of the reason why we moved back to the Bay Area, because of the cultural diversity. And you're right. When you lose your person, you all of a sudden you're not single and you're not married. And the couple friends you have represent you in a different dynamic. And I have to say, because of my experiences growing up and because I didn't have a strong family structure, in that I don't mean structure, my parents were responsible parents. I just didn't fit with them. So I chose the people who I surrounded myself with very carefully. To me, it was never about being popular or having the most friends. It was having people who truly mattered in my life. So as a result, the friendships that I've had from childhood are the same friendships I have. My closest friends are the ones I've had for more than 30 years. Uh, it's the people I can count on the fingers of two hands. And what I did, and maybe unintentionally, but because of what I bring forward in my life, my husband and I curated and cultivated a really dear group of friends, even where we live now. And they were very close to both of us. But what they said to me when I lost him, and they lost him too, was that you are enough. You are not, yes, it was you and Doug, but you are you. and we love you. And the community that I've created has not forgotten me. And I am included in things, and I don't let it bother me. I know there are nights where, they go out as couples, and that doesn't bother me. But most often, I am included. And I've created a chosen family for myself and my children that the men step in to help with my girls, or all of the girls uncles. Everyone is an auntie, and they have permission to parent my children the way I parent my children, and vice versa. So I have to say, community is such an important aspect of this stage in life, because we're social creatures. We're not meant to hide away and be shut or be shunned. It makes me so sad when I hear that from other women, especially, who say that the couple of friends they once socialized with are not including them anymore.
Mm. Samina, thank you for sharing that. It's so meaningful what you said, because you used the word that you and your husband curated really carefully the type of friendships that you made. I love that word. I had never heard of it in that way, of really putting that effort that it goes into creating these friendships and community around you. And the fact that the one that you built is still there to support you, because so many times when there are changes like this in life, and I see it more often. I've been doing this for 6 years, so I've interviewed a lot of different people in different stages of life. And when somebody has lost a spouse, a lot of times they feel very isolated from what used to be their community. But the fact that you've been able to maintain, but also what you had been able to work within you to not feel like you're being excluded when they're going out on their own or something like that. It's not about you in in that moment. It's just that they just happen to be going on something that is two for two, and they're not. Yeah. So I appreciate you sharing your perspective in that, and that it's still been supportive, and that the dads had also stepped in, that your male friends have stepped in also to support the girls and be that for them too. So thank you for sharing. Let's go into chatting about the timeline a little bit. Doug died December, no, did not, I don't know the month, in 2023.
Yes, in April.
Okay, April of 2020. Oh, it's coming up in 2023. And the girls were at that time
They
7.
just turned 7, a week and
Just
a half or higher.
before, right? And it was a sudden, unexpected death.
Accident. Mhm.
And so, what type of resources did you and the girls have then in order to help you in your grief journey at that starting stage of grief? Of course, it continues, but in those early days and weeks of grief, what were some of these support systems you had?
I would have to say, probably, again, the community. My community was probably my greatest source of strength and assistance and care. Um, so I should back up and say that, because I'm from the East Coast, many of my friends are on the East Coast, and I actually have one friend in London. And as soon as it happened, I had one dear, dear friend. I called her in the morning, and she was there at my house that afternoon from New York. She flew right away, and everybody just kind of came. They coordinated among who was coming so that I wouldn't be overwhelmed, and then everyone leaves at the same time. So they too were quite aware of that. They were the ones who, I think, really picked me up in those early days. I was very concerned about my kids, as I think any parent is. What's going to happen with the girls? And something that's really important to note is my husband and I had a reverse professional relationship, marriage, in that I worked and traveled a lot. He had taken care of the children full time from day one. So for them, it was an incredible, devastating loss. More so than, I think, if your parents are working and you see them at night, because he was their everything. He did everything with them and spent all of his time with them. And so, because I was so concerned about the kids, my friends found counselors for me, grief specific counselors, and I got my children into grief therapy 2 weeks after he died. Because but my background is in healthcare. I do recognize the importance of early intervention, especially in trauma, even if child is not willing to talk about it. But it was very important for me to find certified grief therapists who focused in children, because techniques in children are very different, because children don't have the emotional maturity or capacity to talk through therapy. So that was one of the first things I did. And what I did was, like, I leaned on my circle of friends. So they took over almost intuitively, because they know, again, when we talk about curating friendships, I knew exactly the kind of friends I had. So amongst themselves, they coordinated based on their strengths. Who could write an obituary? Who could set up a website? Who could help in the kitchen and coordinate? Who could, organize the memorial service? And they took it upon themselves to lean into their areas of strength and formed their own text group. And they took care of so much of it so that I could just be and grieve and fall apart as I needed to.
That is so important what you just shared, that they showed up in a way of being themselves. And it's something in your book too. It's like that part of when you're supporting someone, show up with who you are and the traits that you have and the skills that you have show up in that way for the person that is grieving. And the fact that they were able to manage all these different logistical things and supportive things towards, for you and the girls during that time, that is just beautiful that they showed up that way for you. Let's talk about your book and the process of you starting to write and how that helped you and has helped you in your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the additional resources that my friends found for my girls was a lovely nonprofit group called Cara, and they focus on children and grief. And it's a meeting that happens twice a month. And one of my daughters still attends the group. And while the parents drop their children off, there's a group for those parents, because they too are grieving the loss of their spouse. And I would sit there first, crying in complete and utter disbelief that, oh my gosh, how am I sitting in a grief group? To, we would all talk about things, and there were some common themes that came across that honestly we would just, complain about. How could so and so be so insensitive? How could someone say something like this? They don't know. They don't understand what we're going through. And we very jokingly said, gosh, we should write a book about this. And because I am a kind of a thought, an idea to impact person, and my background is writing, I did it. I actually basically created a list, and I created it out of anger at first, very important to know, of all of the things that had wronged us collectively as a group. And I let it sit, of course, because, you shouldn't do anything in anger, but I had to get it out of me, because to me, writing is therapeutic. And I let it sit there for a while. And I had been writing a memoir for a few years before my husband died. And the night that he died, I was actually proofing it to give it to him for his first read. So he never got to read my memoir. So what I did was I first focused on rewriting the end of my chapter, my book, to reflect his loss. And that's my first book. I Can, I Will, and I Did. And that was about my experiences as being other and overcoming them in a world where it seemed like everything was fighting against me, and the universe was against me. So I finished that, and then that was a feeling of accomplishment. And so then a year later, I was able to tackle, what do I want to do with this? And it dawned upon me through time and clarity that, my gosh, no one meant to hurt us. And I just really struggled to think about, what's the common thread? Why does this happen? And I realized it's because we have a curtain between those of us who experience loss and those of us who haven't. And those of us who haven't have no idea what it's like. It's unimaginable. It's a loss like no other. And the loss of a sibling or an elderly parent, that does not compare to the loss of your spouse, your person, your other half, because that's a loss of yourself and your identity in the world. So I realized that, but then I also realized it's society's profound discomfort with the thought of death, their own mortality. And it's the discomfort that drives so many people to say, "Oh, I can't include them anymore because she's not part of a couple," or "I'll just send a casserole and be done with it. I did my part," or send the obligatory flowers and you're done. And then you forget about it and you go on with the rest of your life because your life is perfect and normal. And so I really had to dig deep to understand what it was that was driving this pervasive human behavior and its discomfort. And it's it's like people say, God forbid if I die. That's what they say, if I die. Well, it's when,
Yeah.
right? It is when you
Yeah.
will die. And it's not God forbid, it will happen. And
You mentioned that you had found a book that said like something like a
if I
handbook
die,
of being
it's an
able,
if
if
I
I
die
die,
by
you're like, wait, why isn't it called
when
when
I
I
die,
die? Yeah,
right?
yes.
Because we have found discomfort with it. So I wrote this book not for those of us who are going through it, but for those of us around those of us who are going through it or who will go through it if there is a sickness in the family or if there has been a loss. And it's very simply written. It's really meant to be a first-hand guide that says, here's what we're really feeling. And you probably don't realize this. When you say this is what we're thinking. When you do this is how we react, but we're not going to tell you because we're too polite. When you say, how are you? You want us to say fine. We're fine. So that's what we say, but we're not fine. But we know that's what you want to hear. So it's meant to really pull back the curtain on it and be very um, directive in please don't say this. Instead, say this. Please don't do this. Instead, do this. And it's meant to be almost like that format of there was a diet book, eat this, not this. It's basically that. And I did it, I wrote it very intentionally. I wrote it to be brief, to be non-confrontational, to be easy to follow, easy to index, and succinct because no one wants to read about it. So if I could make it palatable and somewhat engaging and real, my hope was that people will read it. And I end it with some checklists of things that people who want help don't realize how to help. Um, and because I think everyone will need it at some point in
Yes.
their life.
Now, what would you say to someone as they're reading it and they are looking at the sections that say, don't do this, and you realize, oh my goodness, I've done everything in the don't list when I've supported someone that's been going through the loss of a spouse or something? What would you say to someone as they're reading this when they look in hindsight of what they might have done and there what would be your suggestion for those emotions that show up?
I would say thank you for reading, because the fact that you're even reading it and taking the time to understand it is great. And don't worry about it. I mean, I was
Yes.
guilty of some of those things too. And it's really not until you're in this position that you understand it. And it's never too late. You can apologize. You can say, I didn't realize. You can apologize. You can let it go. You can be the friend who hasn't checked in a while. And, through the book, it says just check in every once in a while. Just say you're
Mhm.
thinking of them. Even if you didn't reach out, it's okay. People just want to know that they're not forgotten. People want to know that
Yes.
they matter. Whatever side of this story that you're sitting on, there's a need for connection. And hopefully the people in your life give you grace, like those are the moments not to hold grudges, and
Yes.
nothing like a loss like this reframes your outlook on life.
Yeah, having grace with yourself and but also hoping that the person that is grieving also has a little bit of grace with you and knowing that even as you were trying to support, you might have said the wrong thing, but you were trying to
Yeah,
show up in the best way you could.
Right, and that's the acknowledgement. It's just the acknowledgement. That's such a
Hmm.
huge step, just trying to be better at it, taking the time to educate yourself, to be a better supporter. That's half the battle. It's confronting it, right?
Yes, no. And let's go into some of these. Like one of the main things a lot of times we say is like, do you need anything? Can I, we make these very, and I'm in the space. I've grieved myself, not the spouse, not a spouse, but I've grieved in other situations, and I walk alongside people as they're grieving. And yet I tend to myself say the wrong things, even in those situations, even when I know. Okay. So there's times in which you might check in on someone and say this very broad question of like, is there anything I can do for you? Right? Like this very
Right.
open-ended one. Let's
Yes.
go into this example. For example, what is the rephrasing of that very broad question that you would
Yeah,
suggest to our listeners?
yeah, so let me tell you why I put that in there because when you're in the depths of grief, you don't know what you want. And we do not want to ask for help and we can't think. So the fact is we feel like it's another burden. Like you want me to think about what you can do? Like it's almost like, are you kidding me? So as I lay out my book, do little things that are thoughtful. Ask, when was the last time you ate? Let me make you a cup of tea. Would you? Give me the keys to your mailbox if that's the case. Like, let me go through your mail. Are your bills all paid? If you're a close enough person. What are the plans? Take the garbage out. Find out what the other person is missing in their lives and show up in that way. And don't forget, especially with a spouse, you've lost the one person who took care of you. There's no one who takes care of me anymore. I take care of myself. So even the slightest gesture of, coming by and, bringing, a bottle of wine or making a cup of tea and sitting with them just in silence means so much because, as you said earlier, grief is isolating. Even when you're surrounded by people, you feel all alone. And I think, my one thing, and I said this to all of my community, all of my friends, is you will continue to say Doug's name. We will continue to talk about him. We will continue to remember him. You don't erase that person. And it's now become normal. Doug's name comes up every single week in my life by other people and for good things because he made an impact. Or when we go places, oh, Doug would have loved this thing, or and they say it, and that makes me so happy because it helps us move forward in our grief, and it makes it not so heavy, but it makes it more of, okay, this is now normal. It's normalizing it. And for our children, that's very, very important. You cannot erase a parent.
Yeah, it's because it's all of a sudden when people have this fear of talking about it, it's not like you got divorced. It's which is like
No.
some right. It's which is very different that you're like, oh, I don't know, should I talk about her ex? Those. This is your person. You still were in love. You had been married for
Yes.
21 years. This was who you
Yes.
were with. It's a huge part of your life and your identity.
Identity.
Hi, I just had to come on and just kind of interrupt right now this episode that you're hearing. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful that you guys are listening to this conversation. And every single time I hear a guest, there's something new that I learn and something else that ends up showing up within me that I realize I still have to work on. And if by chance, as you're listening to this conversation, you're feeling the same, that there's parts of you that are being stirred up, and you are navigating a life transition right now that feels just heavy and stressful and just layered with grief, I want you to know that you do not have to do it alone. I invite you to connect with me for a free 15-minute discovery call, and we'll explore what's coming up for you and see if working together feels like the right fit. Just check the show notes below for my email and reach out for details. I'd really love to support you in integrating these transitions with more ease and clarity. Can't wait to hear back from you. Okay, let's keep on listening to the episode. And now let's talk about that part of identity because your book itself is called Don't Call Me a Widow. So I want to know that part of the identity as a spouse, and then with this word of widow and how it feels when you hear it.
Well, yeah, the title is actually "Don't Call Me Widow." There's no
Oh, don't
A,
call me
but
widow. Sorry.
yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
So the word, I've never liked the word widow. I don't know. It's just an emotional reaction. And the first time someone introduced me as Doug's widow, I had a visceral reaction. I flinched. I thought, I'm not a widow. And of course, because my background is communications, I looked it up. What is the definition of widow? And it's a very old term, goes back to Sanskrit and Old English. And it essentially means someone who's useless and has no purpose left in life, and horrible things. I cite it in the book, but look it up. It's not a flattering image, but it's basically someone who's done with life. And I thought, well, that's not me. Of course not. So I do not say. I really have an aversion to the word, and I'm not alone. Um, but that's the only word we have in this society. So I still say, my husband. He's not my ex-husband, and I don't even like saying late husband. I say he's my husband, and he died. And so that's one part of me. But you're right. You lose that person, and you've lost part of your identity. And I'm figuring out who I am again, without him, because, when you're with someone for that long, you become almost the same person because, you've matured together, you've grown together, and you've become the person you are in large part with and because of that person you're with. So it's about reframing yourself. So I still wear my engagement and wedding rings. I wear, an initial for him. I'm very much his wife, and he is very much my husband. He died, and that's all it is. That's all I say. But I still talk about him as my husband.
I love it.
Yeah,
I love it. When I read the title of your book, it reminded me that one of the books that I was given when my mom died was Motherless Daughters, and it was like memories. And I'm like, I still have a mother. Like
right.
it felt so odd. I'm like, I don't
Yes,
like to call myself a motherless daughter. I am not
right.
motherless. I have my mother. Just she's,
And I'm
it's like,
still a wife.
and
My
is he
husband's just
right?
not here.
Yes, that's kind of that. So I can, that is that. It's that part of, yeah, it feels so odd. So I don't, yeah, I can see it in that by that lens, how that for you would be that case as it was for me with the motherless. I'm like, no, I
Well,
haven't.
I have to say I haven't read that
Weird.
book.
Yeah.
But, I think that brings up a really important point, which is what I put in my preface. There are so many books out there that are written by esteemed experts who have degrees in this and that, and professional and clinical experience in this and that, but they're not written from a first person point of view. They are experts in name and paper only, not in lived experience. Because I don't know who the author is of that,
It
but
was different little, it was like vignettes of different women that had, their mother had died type of
whoever
thing.
wrote it and
Hmm.
titled it, I'm not sure if that person had gone through it.
Hmm.
Because if she had, she probably would have had the same reaction.
It could have been, but at the same time, what I've realized too is that everybody's perception of things is different in their own. Grief is so unique to the person going
Absolutely.
through it. So I could even see that because we get so caught up, and like you were mentioning language, and we get kind of, we adopt what is already being said very likely, like nonchalant, without thinking of it, right? So very, like I would call my dad, he's a widower, right? Even though I did not know the meaning of that word. My dad's a widower. His now wife was also a widow when they met. I would use that word
Right.
nonchalantly because it's what what is
Yeah,
used,
exactly.
right?
It becomes the standard default language.
Yeah.
And you're right. Grief is very individualized. And my book doesn't mean to speak to everyone, but it is. it is largely my experience and also the experience of others. So it's really
Because you were in that group setting.
I was in the
Yeah.
group setting, but I also had members of the group who lost their spouses in different ways read the book before I published it. And part of why I wanted, because I wanted to give them voice too.
Mm.
I wrote it to give us all a voice and some agency in this position that we find ourselves in, and to let everyone know this is what we feel. So I took notes. I incorporated some of their stories. I took all of their notes. I had other people who had experienced this type of a loss read it and give me feedback. So it doesn't speak for everybody, certainly, but it speaks in large part for what we go through. And I'm also a member of grief groups on Facebook, and so these are all very common issues. And that was kind of why I felt compelled to write this, because I thought, well, again, the grief groups are us speaking in an echo chamber because we're only complaining to each other.
But it's so
No one from
important to
the
have.
outside sees it.
Yes, but it's so important to have these type of groups and communities that do have the similar type of loss, because the part of the comparison and grief, which we've talked about here, I kind of was saying my perspective as the motherless daughter, right, with you. It is not, it's apples to oranges, very different experience. It's not apples to apples. It's a whole other situation. Just because you've lived one type of grief does not relate to
Correct.
the other. Can you talk about that part of really being with peers, like you said, people that really can see you in the same way of your grief, like really see your grief?
Yeah, I do think that's a really important distinction. And one of the things that I do write in the book is don't compare losses. Now, I'm sorry you lost your mother. I don't know when you lost your mother. But there's a circle of life. You're supposed to get married and have kids and then see hopefully grandchildren, live a long life, and then you pass away and hopefully when you've passed away, you've seen your children grow up, you've seen the fruits of your labor, you've seen grandchildren, maybe great grandchildren. And that passing is the end of a life. That is a life complete. And so I would have people say, "Oh, I know how you feel. My father just passed away, and he was 90 something." And how dare you say that to me? Where my 7-year-old children have lost their father. That's an incomplete cycle. So it's really important that you don't compare losses, and you don't compare. You mentioned divorce earlier. Someone said, "Oh, I know how you're feeling since my divorce, blah, blah, blah." And I would get so angry. How dare you compare the death of my husband with the divorce? That has nothing to do with one another. Your husband, ex-husband, is alive and breathing, and you made a conscious decision to leave. I did not have any part of this, nor did he. So it's important to be in a group of your peers because the experiences are not the same. Now, losses are not the same either. Many people in our group lost their spouses to illness, to cancer. And there was only one other person who'd had a sudden death, but her husband's death was it was an undiagnosed congenital issue, and he died in his sleep. So there is a difference, and mine was an accident, so there was trauma. So everybody's experience is very different, but you really cannot compare apples to oranges. A life of an elderly parent, not that it's any less painful, but is fundamentally different than losing your partner of your entire adult life. And because you lose your footing on yourself. You question who you are. You have no more purpose. So, when I think about who I am now, I don't have any dreams anymore. I don't have a dream of retirement. I can't picture myself getting older anymore. I can't even visualize what I might look like. I can't visualize being alive at 70. It's gone. It's like it just doesn't exist in my memory because that part of my identity is gone. And I can only live in the minute, and I can live in short-term bursts. And I travel frequently with my children because it gives me something to look forward to in the short term. But I can't think. I can think of my kids, through teenagehood, and getting to college, but after that, I'm lost. You lose your dreams, you lose your hope, you lose your future. because I've lost myself. What I thought was my perfect life is gone.
Yeah, the whole idea of what was going to be is no longer there. We we go through so many little G's. There's the big G, and then the big grief, and then there's all these other secondary losses and other griefs that come within that end up encompassing also a lot of the energy and the emotions that we go through in our grief. And some of these are this: the loss of the dream, the loss of identity, the loss of a future. It isn't only the grieving of your husband, it is all these other layers of grief. And then you wonder, why is it that I have grief brain, and why am I so exhausted, and why?
And
That's
it's
the
real.
answer. It is
Real.
real.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I'm not the same person I was before he died, and I never will be. And I still suffer from grief brain. I think it takes some time, depending on the significance, the severity, the trauma. Of course, I had trauma with it, but my memory is terrible now. I still don't remember things. It took me months and months and months to get behind a wheel. I physically could not drive, and people couldn't possibly understand it. But it is real. It's a real physiological impact that it's your mind's way of protecting you and trying to reprogram and rewire, to accommodate such a big loss. Um, but yeah, it's one of those things that unless you've been in our shoes, it's unfathomable. And that's really why I wrote that book, because it really gives that look into an area that you can't imagine. And since it's been published, I have a particular friend who has a niece, an adult niece, whose husband has an end stage condition. And she was complaining to her aunt that, oh, everyone is saying the most hurtful things. And she was crying. So my friend shipped 6 of the books to various family members to help them understand what she's going through and how what they're saying to her hurts, because they think they're being helpful and she is not seeing it that way. And she has 5 young children at home.
Right.
And she is well aware of the situation. So the last thing she needs is people seemingly thinking they're helping, but prodding and poking with intrusive questions that are laying even more on her. And again, the brain and the heart can only take so much before they snap. And so, if you want to be helpful, it's really important that you tread lightly and think carefully about it.
A lot of times in that treading lightly, we tend to then be so scared to then not knowing that then we end up not showing up. But again, it is better to show up imperfectly for
Yes.
others than to not show up at all. So don't be discouraged, but at the same time, with books like yours, and as a resource, and for us to really educate ourselves, so that when we have friends or family members going through something like this, we have the tools to know how to support it. I love that your friend went ahead and just sent these books to the other family members around to help her, in her niece and her journey, because her niece, right, is who
Yeah.
you said, yeah,
Yes.
her niece and her journey as she's embarking to event maybe be solo parent at one point. That it is just so important to just again take the reins and the control of the things that you can do, which is again educating yourself, learning more about it, having more conversations with people that know firsthand what it is to go through something like this, or reading stories firsthand, people that have gone through this, like in your case, Samina. So thank you for bringing this up. Also, as a solo parent, and you make that distinction too, you mentioned like don't compare, man, that can you talk about that comparison of solo parenting versus when you're
Anything else?
single? Yeah.
Yes. So the term solo parenting has gotten hijacked by, at least on TikTok, by men. I'm solo today. I'm flying solo today. It's, when men are being fathers to their children without their without their mother's presence. That's not solo parenting. That is, you have your children. You're not babysitting them. You are just with your children. But it's gotten this label of being solo parenting, and there's single parenting. Single parenting is either by choice or by circumstance. But it's something that you willingly have made a decision with. I'm going to choose to have children without someone in my life. I'm going to get divorced. That's single parenting. Um, Solo parenting is you are flying 100% solo. You bear 100% of the emotional burden and responsibility. You have no one to check with. You have no one to discuss school decisions with. You have no one to make the medical decisions for your children with. You have no sounding board. You've lost that other person who loves your children as only a parent can love their children. That is true solo parenting. I have no one. And everything I do, I pray I'm doing the right decision. I think, what would he do? What would he want me to do? And that's how I parent. This is how I feel. How would he feel? But I have no one to bounce things off of. I have no one to have the conversation with after the children go to bed. I'm 100% alone, 100% of the time when it comes to my children and their futures.
And supporting them in their own grief too, in their own grief journey as well. That is also a big responsibility because you're the one that you're navigating your own grief as you're supporting them and theirs and their emotions too. Can you talk
Absolutely.
about that part of really seeing your children and their own grief and supporting them in the ways that each may need?
Yeah, since my husband died, my children are my 100% priority. So I don't work full time anymore. I can't. I need to support them, and I need to be there for them because they've lost one parent, and they now realize how unpredictable life is, and so they suffer from some degree of from anxiety because they said goodnight to their dad one day, and then the next day he was gone, and for them life is scary, and they live with a daily fear that something's going to happen to me and they will be alone. And so they're extra protective. And there's a section in my book that I talk just about children and grief. There is this common phrase that we were talking about. People just like to say the easy thing because it's part of our culture. Oh, children are resilient. Oh, children are resilient. Don't worry. They'll be fine. And I am here to say children of trauma and grief are not resilient. That is a phrase that is thrown around by people who have never experienced a child of grief or trauma. And they need extra care, they need extra work, and they need to be seen and heard and not made to feel invisible. And it's very deliberate work that needs to be done with these children, as I am doing with the therapy that they still go to weekly and they still go to the grief group. And their teachers have been, I work closely with their teachers to educate their teachers on signs of grief and their patterns because children don't have the emotional capacity or maturity to deal with grief as much as adults. I mean, we get walloped by grief. How do you think a young child can handle it? So with children, it frequently comes out as behaviors and anger or acting out or nightmares or bedwetting or all sorts of physical manifestations because they can't get the emotions out. And so I've had to educate the schools that my children attend, because as I've learned, most teachers will go an entire career without ever having experienced a child who's lost a parent. And they are the biggest sources of support for children. But in my case, what my children's school immediately after my husband died was a big source of ongoing grief for my children, who they went to a Christian school, and what I learned was that the school, in its kindness but misguidedness, was saying a daily prayer for our family, for my husband, for the children. So they were re-traumatizing my children and not letting my children have some respite from
Mm.
their grief. And when I raised it to them, they apologized. They didn't realize because, again, society doesn't know how to talk to us as adults in grief. They certainly don't know how to deal with children in grief. But the important thing is you don't not talk to the children. You don't ignore them. You talk to them about their parent. You share good memories. You step in when you can. You think of, just as you think of for us, what did my partner do? Well, what did their daddy do that I can be with them? And again, that's where the uncles have stepped in, taking them out to play golf or to museums or to movies or to the park. And not with their children. I've been really clear, can you do it with my children alone, not with your children, so they don't see, oh, that's someone else's dad. They need some, focused time. And, kids are the future, right? I have I have more yesterdays in my rearview mirror than I have tomorrows looking ahead, but they have their whole lives. And if we don't get this right, children who've lost a parent early in life are more prone to addictions and depression and anxiety and suicidal ideation. So we have to get this right. I have to get this right for my children so they can grow into successful adulthood. And they'll always carry that loss like a tattoo on their heart. It will always be there. It's just how do we live with it?
With them. Mhm. And you mentioned something in your book that a lot of times too, the child may not show it as much because they don't want to bring up even more grief to the parent. They're worried even about the
Yes.
parent, right? So they may not show their grief in a way that it's clear for you to even see as a parent yourself, even living with them, that you wouldn't know that that is grief because they might be hiding it from you to not make you feel more sad, right? As well.
Right. That's parentification right there. I have one child who just became kind of head of household. She did everything her daddy did. She wanted to cook. She wanted to clean. She said, "Mommy, relax." And I had to say, you know what, sweetheart,
My
I'm the
heart.
mommy. You're the child. Let me be the mommy. But she was trying to take care of me because that was a way for her to cope with her grief. She was tucking it in. She was stuffing it down. And she was being useful. And she was being a problem solver. But she wasn't dealing with it. She wasn't dealing with it. And it took her it was almost 3 years for her to cry, really cry from the depths of her soul.
Mm.
And she is a child who wakes up every single night with nightmares of me dying because she's kept it down. She's kept it hidden for so long and she was trying not to deal with it. But we have to be careful, right? Because that's a child who will grow up too soon, mature too soon, and miss out on the joy of childhood. Now, there is, they don't have the most joyful childhood. They have a childhood. The little moments of joy are what we try to find. And they're always tainted with, oh, if I think to myself, oh, if he could see them now, oh, he would be so proud. And I make sure I tell them he would be so proud. And here's why he would be so proud. Because I can't just say it as a blanket statement, because part of it is that positive reinforcement of who they are and how he wanted them to progress in life. And you have to keep them on track. And, I know so many people pay condolences when there is a loss, but the children are often ignored. And my own child said to me, when I said, look, all these people are here for us. And she said, no, they're all here for you.
Mm.
No one's here for us. And that was
They're seven at 7 years
that's 7
old.
they said
At
that.
7 years old to have that verbiage, I'm like my heart was breaking. Think when you just said that she was like trying to take care of. Just imagine this 7 year old doing all these roles of thinking she's gonna step into daddy's shoes and now take care of you. It was just like, oh,
It's
my
heartbreaking, right? And
heart.
other people will dismiss it as, "Oh, aren't you a good girl? Aren't you a
No,
big
no,
girl helping mommy?"
heartbreaking.
That's actually not a good thing. You don't
Mm.
reinforce that. You say, "Thank you, I appreciate it, but that's not your job. That's my job."
Oh gosh, yeah, that is just so. Yeah, these little images of these children that get in my head, just like I'm like my heart's breaking for for
Thank you.
your
And
daughters. And
it is heartbreaking to, when you
yeah,
can't help them with their own heartbreak, but they have to,
yes,
they're going
it's
through
part
it,
of
and
it.
all you can do
Yes.
is be there with them and let them know it's okay to feel it.
Yes, and that's the part too, acknowledging that we don't have to fix that emotion. It's okay for that emotion to come out of grief. It's okay for the sadness to come out.
Of course.
Yeah, and then by us doing that with the children, your friends doing it with you as they're there to support you, not trying to fix you. It is just so important. Just being there, holding space for the other person as they are grieving is in itself one of the best ways you can show up for someone else.
Right, because people are uncomfortable with it for themselves, so they want it to be okay. So they say, "It'll be okay. You'll be fine." Just, and that they want to seem like they're doing something because they want to fix it, but they can't fix this, and they shouldn't be trying to fix it. It's not fixable. You have to move through it at your own pace. You can't stuff it down, and it's like "How are you? I'm fine." They Because people want you to say, "I'm fine."
Mhm.
For themselves, not for us,
Yes, 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 yeah. Because it's
because it makes them
we're so
uncomfortable.
uncomfortable. Yeah, yeah. We're constantly, and this is for everything. We're just in this society of everything's fine. I'm fine. I don't know if you ever watched Ross, right? Friends. I remember the fine. I'm fine. There was like one of
Yeah,
these episodes. I was like, ooh, that then it really comes out. But I'm not okay, and
yeah,
that is really the reality. We're always trying to minimize our emotions just to make everybody else around us be okay rather than acknowledging our own pain.
exactly, exactly, and it's okay to say, "I'm having a rough day. I'm having a down." I still say, "I'm having a down day." And I just tell my friends, but I also have friends who just check in randomly, like, "How are you? Just thinking of you." And, you know, years later, I mean, this is what matters because I think also when people hit that 1 year mark and that 1 year anniversary, everyone's like, "Oh, good, I'm done."
Mm-mm.
And, often year 2 is harder because all of the shock and, kind of the fractured nature of that first year of trying to figure things out and put order to everything is over, and they think, "Okay, we're done." But after that, you're like, "Oh god, this is forever." This is not like, I don't have any more things to do, like, I've done it.
Yeah, logistic, all
Now
the
what are you gonna
business.
do? Yeah,
Yeah, all
now
the
what are you gonna
business of all the administrative stuff. You've already set the
Absolutely.
bank account. You've already set that first year. You're probably busy just
You're
even
doing
doing
stuff.
that.
You're
Yeah, the
doing it,
next
and
year is, yeah.
yeah, because then that's like, "Oh, this is it. This is forever." And
Yeah.
I find New Year's, very difficult because I think that's another year without him, and every new year I'm gonna have is gonna be without him.
Mm. Yeah, it's a reminder of that.
Yeah.
Samina, it's been a beautiful conversation, and your book is beautiful. And again, it's a very easy read in terms of how you've been able to develop it with the chapters. If somebody just wants to jump into a chapter, definitely read the introduction so that you can get to know more of Samina's story and why she wrote this book. Of course, you're hearing it now. And then you can even jump to the different chapters if there's something specific that you want to know as you're accompanying someone else that is grieving the loss of a spouse. You'll be able to have some of these tools that you've so beautifully and eloquently been able to share with us today, a few of those. So thank you, Samina. Samina, I will be sharing your website in the show notes. Is there anything else regarding how people can reach you that we should say as well, or
Yes,
get your
I have
book,
a
where they could buy the
contact
book? Mhm.
Yeah, I have a contact, form within my website, www.saminabarry.com, and there are links to the books, but both of my books right there, but they're both available on Amazon.
Perfect. Thank you. And before we finish, is there something else you want to say to the listeners before we wrap up that I have not asked you?
Yeah, I would just say, the death is going to touch us all in one way or another, and we can't always have our head in the sand. And for those who are going through something or know someone who's going through something, I encourage you to just, enter with an open heart and recognize that we're, social creatures and we all need some sense of community and support. and just take those steps to be present for one another, because in the end, it's the presence of matters that the presence that matters, and it's the legacy you leave and the impact you make on the people in your life.
Thank you. Thank you again, Samina Bari, here with
Thank
us today. Thank you. Thank you again so much for choosing to listen today. I hope that you can take away a few nuggets from today's episode that can bring you comfort in your times of grief. If so, it would mean so much to me if you would rate and comment on this episode. And if you feel inspired in some way to share it with someone who may need to hear this, please do so. Also, if you or someone you know has a story of grief and gratitude that should be shared so that others can be inspired as well, please reach out to me. And thanks once again for tuning in to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. Have a beautiful day.